Another major theme in Micronaut 2 is serverless support. We have significantly improved our support for serverless in a number of different ways. And actually, this is kind of something that's probably nicely demoable through Micronaut launch. So we now have two ways where you can define for each serverless provider, AWS, Google Cloud Function, and Azure. You can either define an application, and then you can add, for example, if I add the Cloud Function feature in here, what will end up happening is we will get an application that is defined in terms of normal controllers and add controller and add get and so forth. And what essentially happens is Micronaut defines a kind of a handler for that essentially provides routing, or like a gateway to route function requests to your controller. So the advantage of this approach is that you can essentially build a traditional application, not like a normal Micronaut application using app controller and app get and so forth. And then, for example, you can deploy a slice of it that you want to make serverless to Cloud Function or to Azure or to Lambda, and it works as you expect. The other thing that we do is we automatically set up, for example, the Cloud Function. It'll set up the Cloud Function invoker so that you can run the function locally and test it locally against Google's function SDK. So if I do the same thing and then I switch to, for example, another provider, let's say Azure, you'll see that we do again the same thing. But Azure function only supports JDK 8. Oops. So let's go back to JDK 8. At least Micronaut launch, tells you when something is not compatible with each other. So for Azure, again, it sets up, a typical Hello controller, but then it will also create the function trigger for Azure. So you essentially, this is your trigger, and it will route requests to your controller as they come in, as the function invocation happens. And in addition, we set up the Azure function SDK, so you can run your function locally and test it and deploy it with Micronaut. And same thing with AWS. So if you do AWS Lambda, we basically, again, reconfigure your project to ensure that you can define controllers and so forth. But this time using Lambda. So in this case, we integrate with AWS serverless container, so that allows essentially proxying onto your Lambda, and you can define your application as traditional controllers and so forth. So what happens then when we switch that to the serverless function application type? So what happens when you switch to the serverless application function application type is that essentially you, instead of writing like a normal application, you can write actual low-level functions. For example, I can directly write Google Cloud background functions that subscribe to pub/sub messages and use dependency injection with them. So that's the alternative approach. That when you choose the serverless function option, you essentially get lower level function support. Same thing if I choose, for example, Lambda, you'll see that what you get is, request handlers, which are low level Lambda request handlers that are much, lower level, integrate directly with Lambda. So in case of Lambda, if you wanted to like listen to specific Lambda events or payloads, you may want a request handler of this nature. So a lot of work has gone into making our serverless support more robust. And the other thing that I didn't demonstrate as well is, for example, for Lambda, if you also choose the GraalVM native image feature, in addition, it will set up a project for you that is, well, it's not supported for Groovy language, sorry. It'll set up a project that allows you to essentially deploy a native Lambda using GraalVM native image directly to the Lambda environment, so that it gives you a Docker file that lets you build your native image and deploy it into a function.zip file, which you can then deploy to Lambda and so forth. So it'll help. It's worth keeping an eye out, seeing the combination of AWS, Lambda, and GraalVM, because there's significant gains to be had in terms of cold start times with that combination.